start. Today I'm presenting on the topic of enlarging inclusive leadership in education. And it's really nice to see the UN Sustainable Goals on the virtual background that we shared because I started with it with some of the most important documents that are related to inclusive education. And of course, one of them is Global Agenda for Education 2030 and also Goal 4 for UN Sustainable Development Goals related to education. And of course, there's a rapidly growing interest in inclusive leadership. And inclusive leadership has climbed into the popular consciousness. There's a lot of research about it currently. So we would like to assume that actually there is a lot going in inclusive leadership, yet when I looked at the literature, the evolution of educational leadership towards inclusivity is actually quite slow and faces many barriers, and I would like to talk about some of them. One of the important things is that, first of all, educational leadership functions in quite complex and diverse educational environments, which are often characterized by hierarchical nature of the educational institutions and centralized decision making. And in addition to that, even though we promote inclusive education, we require standardized testing and evaluations for students, which we know sometimes ends up with teachers asking students who have different special needs not to come on those days when the testing is happening to have the ratings and so on, some really paradoxical situations. And sometimes the voices of the educational community, teachers, parents are often overlooked because the leadership has to focus on a lot of other aspects related to administrative functions, and educational leaders often feel and report that they're unprepared and lack training and support related to inclusive leadership specifically. To add to the bundle of all the issues, we have cultural and organizational barriers that are there, and there are many issues that educational leadership has to face. So one of the objectives for this paper was to look at research about inclusive leadership on education. And my colleague and I, we used bibliometric mapping of existing literature about inclusive leadership, trying to look at specifically how educational and inclusive leadership link together, what are the keywords, and hopefully this will facilitate some more awareness about inclusive leadership in education. So what we basically did, we looked at a lot of publications from 2000 up to now using CAVOS engine, using keywords such as inclusive leadership or education. And we mapped out a total of 229 keywords with a frequency of at least 5 times. And we used VOS viewer software to visualize things. I'm going to show you the picture in a moment. So basically what this means, if you can see at this picture, those are the keywords of educational and inclusive leadership. And the colors from red to blue indicate how frequent and pervasive the keywords are. So the red is the most frequent clusters, and the blue would be the least frequent clusters. The words that are grouped together are combined into one cluster, and the lines, the thicker the line, the more intensity and frequency there is. So as we can see, educational leadership and inclusive leadership are somehow on two different clusters. And it was interesting to see that because there's a lot of literature on educational leadership, on inclusive leadership, but then when we look at actual findings, the cluster of educational leadership is much greater. And inclusive leadership cluster includes a lot of things from creative teaching, innovative behavior, engagement, transformational leadership. while educational cluster includes professional development, educational policy, social justice, and other kinds of issues. And the interesting thing that there are other bridging notes that seem to bring the two together. That is innovation, management, and transformational leadership. And innovation seems to be a better developed node in this. So let me show you this visually. So you have here's educational leadership and how it's related to different types of leadership, like instructional, distributed, and management node is here, transformational leadership, and innovation is the thing that seems to link those two together. And you will also see that in the next slide. So here you see how educational leadership and inclusive leadership, what are the connections between the keywords? And we see that innovation is somewhere, that's why I call it the bridging node. Here I mentioned also management as a promising node. So something in between this inclusive and educational leadership. We see things related to types of leadership and management as well. And transformational leadership was the most closely related node to inclusive leadership. And maybe it's not surprising because transformational leaders set the vision. They want to see the changes and drive those changes. So that's also something important to look at. But from the findings, what we see that educational leadership and inclusive leadership are not in the same cluster, as we can see. So to discuss a little bit what we found in this paper is that we can see that evolution of educational leadership towards inclusion is rather slow, what I see in the literature, because educational systems are often designed to support hierarchy and other types of goals that are important to achieve, and accountability measures such as standardized testing might actually contradict inclusivity and marginalize some of the groups of students and parents in light of focusing on academic outcomes. And innovations as this bridging node may help ensure the meeting of the diverse needs and broader participation in educational leadership, and combine this education and inclusion idea together. And hopefully, by using innovative measures and strategies, it would be possible to address some current systemic barriers in education. Therefore, enlarging inclusive leadership in educational research will take time and practice. And this overlap between educational and inclusive leadership lies in the transformational leadership and innovation, as we saw. And innovations might actually be helpful in linking the two concepts. And this mapping identified a close connection between the educational and inclusive leadership, particularly in the context of transformation and innovation. Thus, inclusivity must be recognized as a crucial pathway to effective educational leadership, and we need to prioritize the development of inclusive leadership that places inclusion at its core. So inclusive educational leadership should not only embrace diversity, but also ensure that it is integrated as a fundamental vision and goal, guiding the development of innovative, equitable policies and practices for all students. Thank you very much. And maybe there are some questions or comments.